The England depth chart for 2022, folks. We're going to have a look at the year which saw Eddie Jones get the sack. And we'll see, I guess, if he could have done anything differently from the players he's used. We'll check his record first, the depth by position, and then look at what was the most selected 15. And you guys can always let us know how you think things may change in just over a month when the Six Nations get underway. I should say, if you want some England rugby gear, check out England Rugby Store in the description. They could use some money because they spent a bunch of it paying Eddie out of his contract, and Borthwick from Leicester and old 2 cents could use a wee bit of commission as well. But yeah, link down in the description for England Rugby Store. They're always doing sales, and the commission comes from their end, not yours. So there you go, happy days. We've already done the depth charts for Ireland and South Africa and New Zealand and France. All the teams ranked above, and it's been interesting to see that kind of balance of which sides are rotating a ton of players and which sides have been keeping their kind of starting 15, getting the lion's share of the time. Where do England fit into that mix? Well, they are definitely, I would say, down the rotation end of things. Not always by choice. Sometimes that is enforced with injuries, but we will go through them. But before we get to the record of England, which saw Eddie get the sack, 5 wins, a draw, and 6 losses this year. Particularly poor home form, I think, didn't help Eddie with just the 2 wins. 3 losses and a draw at home. Obviously losing to South Africa. The final one was the kind of straw that broke the camel's back. But a draw with New Zealand, which was a great last 10 minutes, but otherwise a kind of poor performance. They lost to Argentina. They did manage to beat Japan. They did manage to beat Wales, but they lost to Ireland at the start of the year as well. So yeah, despite the away win in Australia, which was a series win, there's not been that much to shout about. Like, they beat Wales and Italy in the Six Nations. Italy were improved, but England should always be beating them realistically. And then Wales were kind of poor. You beat Japan. So, I mean, apart from a couple of wins, like I said, in Australia, the list of scalps has not been that great. And obviously Eddie paid the price for it. But was he building into something? Let's have a wee look. We'll start with the front row. And it's pretty stable. All of these guys who played in the front row in the green there, like the starting guys, get at least 50% of the game time. So Genge there at the loose head gets like 3/4 of the game time this year. So he's clearly Eddie's preferred option. He loves that guy on a ball carry. Certainly concedes a few too many penalties, but yeah, around the park, Genge is a proper unit. And then Marco Vunipola is there in blue with about a 5th of the game time. And then Joe Marler, not always available, right? Kind of sneaking in there. It's a very similar numbers what he got last year. It makes the old cameo, but not a heck of a lot. So Genge is your main man. And then hooker is pretty much just 2 guys. It's Jamie George and Luke Cowan-Dickie. George in green, Cowan-Dickie in blue. George edges the game time, but not by a heck of a lot. They have used Singleton. They have used Dolly, but if memory serves, they didn't get off the bench when they played. The starting guys pretty much played the 80 minutes. I think they did that to Singleton last year as well. Just leave him on the bench for the 80. So, yeah, kind of a brutal one. But those are clearly the two main guys. And then tight head, Kyle Sinclair, top guy, same as last year, about half the game time. Will Stewart there with a wee bit less in blue. And then Joe Hayes there in yellow with just kind of token minutes. So I think, if anything, you'd like Hayes to be getting a little bit more game time there rather than just relying on the 2 main guys. But, yeah, it's not real different from what we saw last year. The main things that we saw differently last year, we saw Blamire get some minutes, Langdon, Bevan Rodd got some minutes last year, whereas it's not something we really saw this year. And I should say, I'm only counting test matches, not Barbars games. There was a Barbars test in there as well, but yeah, not quite the same as test level. So yeah, that's your front row. If anything, you'd say it's not really much in that 3rd choice guy getting a lot of game time. It's mainly the 1st guy and the 2nd guy. But there you go. The locks, a little bit different. A little bit different from the front row. For the front rowers, it was basically 2 main guys. For the lock, because there's a whole bunch of guys. So loose head lock for England, that's your number 4. Maro Itoje, there in green, getting around half of the game time, which is down a bit from last year, because he played a bit more 6 this year than he did last year. So he's still there with about half the game time. And then who else you got? You got a whole mixture of guys. You got Chesham there in blue. Alex Cole's there in yellow. Charlie Ewels, who's been injured, there in purple. Law's there in red. Ribbon's there in orange. And then Hill there in black. So it's Johnny Hill. So it's been a real real mixed bag of guys in the second row for England behind Itoje. Like everyone else is between like 15% and 5% of the overall minutes allocated to that position this year. Maro gets half, and the rest of it's just scattergunned between all these other guys. So yeah, it's a little bit weird that we don't see kind of a clear second guy. But again, if Yules was fit, I feel like he would have got a lot more minutes because Eddie is a big fan of old Yules. Tight head prop, that's your number 5. So Johnny Hill, again, similar to Maro, getting around about half the game time. Maro and Hill are certainly Eddie's preferred lock and duo. Then you get Nick Ezekwe there in blue. His minutes were certainly up from last year. And then Itoje there in yellow, so he features on both sides. So Hill and Itoje have featured on both sides, interestingly enough. Yules, again, is there on the 5 side as well, also in purple, so he's purple on both sides. Ribbons, and then even a little bit of Launchbury. So, yeah, it's Hill and Itoje, basically, and then roller dice, and you got a bunch of other guys. No one, again, keep an injury in mind, has quite stepped up to be the third guy. Like, a lot of countries seem to have 3 guys, right? Whitelock, Retallick, Scotty Barrett, Etzebeth, Diyaka, Mostert. There's like 3 lock and duos or trios, but England, bit different. Certainly used a few more names than some of the others. And that kind of includes the back row as well. 6, 7, and 8. 6, it's very similar to last year. Last year they used a load of guys in this position as well. Courtney Laws, who remembers missed a fair bit of game time there in green. He's still the same guy in terms of being the number 1 guy as last year with a similar amount of game time, just under half. And then Itoje certainly increased his game time on the blind side there in blue. Last year he featured on the blind side only, kind of very token minutes. So those are your main 2 guys, and it's interesting that Eddie seems to like that bit of tall timber in the back row. He likes kind of lock loose forward. Neither Laws or Itoje are like big ball carrying 6s, but they're very defensively sound. Both are great at the breakdown, great at the line out, and just make some dominant tackles. But you lose a bit of that extra punch when you put those guys in terms of just their ball carrying. But then Sam Simmons is there in yellow, and you don't pick that guy for the same reasons you pick Itoje or Laws, right? He's absolutely different. He's very much the explosive ball carrying player rather than a line out or dominant tackle defensive guy. That's kind of what he's known for. So yeah, Simmons, and then Dombrandt, kind of very similar vein to the Simmons mold. And then there's a bunch of other guys, Ludlam and Coles and Willis and Curry and Chisholm. Yeah, it's been again a bit of a scattergun, but yeah, he seems to prefer his lock loose forwards. Whether Borthwick does that or whether he switches, that's going to be one to watch. 7 has been largely about Tom Curry, 60% of the game time. Underhill's there in blue. Obviously spent a lot of the time unavailable this year, which is a pity because I know Eddie has previously kind of liked that Curry, Underhill and Billy V back row, but we didn't really get that much chance to see Underhill this year, sadly. Ludlam is there in yellow, so he's also got a decent amount of game time. And then Simmons once again, and then you got a bunch of other guys who've appeared for really token time, like Willis, with like 1% of the game time, so not really worth adding to the discussion, but he's obviously another option. But yeah, Curry's been your main guy. And then number 8, 2 main guys plus one other main guy who's a bit down from last year. Billy V as the number 1 guy, same as he was last year. There was a little while where it looked like his days were done, but he's been back in favour. Sam Simmons there in blue, and then Alex Dombrandt there in yellow. You're blessed in England with great number 8s. Either any of those 3 guys, if you pick them, I think you're getting something very special out of those guys. So in terms of a big ball carrying number 8, all 3 of them can do magic stuff. So yeah, whoever ends up getting the nod under Borthwick, I think you can't really go wrong. Some of the guys who've kind of fallen off, Mark Wilson's obviously retired since then. He had some game time last year. Lewis Ludlow, Ben Earl is another one who can maybe feel himself a little bit unlucky. I mean, Ted Hill and Callum Chick in the second row also, I think, had a little bit of game time last year, but pretty limited. But I mean, largely, this is the same set of faces that we saw last year. There's not really any kind of wholesale changes, but Eddie has certainly been tinkering around a wee bit. But I like playing Simmons at 6, which is not really, kind of what he does. He's been playing more Itoje at 6 kind of thing. So, yeah, same but different, I suppose you could say. Into the backs, and there's certainly a big change from last year. Number 9, I think this is the least clear number 9 starter we've had from any of the teams we've looked at thus far. Most teams have got a kind of out-and-out starter. For Ireland, it's Gibson Park. For the All Blacks, it's Aaron Smith. But for England, Ben Youngs just edges Van Portfleet there in terms of minutes. So Ben Youngs is in green. Certainly a lot less minutes than he got last year. He's been used off the bench a fair bit this year. And then Van Portfleet's there in blue, who seems to have stepped up, at least under Eddie, to be the preferred option. And then Randall's there in yellow, kind of fell off the picture. Injured a wee bit as well, if memory serves. And then even old Danny Kerr there in purple as well. So they've used 4 guys, and none of them is the out-and-out front runner. But I mean, recency bias says it's Van Portfleet is the main guy. But on total minutes, Youngs just kind of edges them. So that's, I think, one of the more interesting questions where, like, which direction Borthwick goes. But Van Portfleet probably, if you're future-proofing the side, seems like a pretty good option. And then, goodness me, look at number 10. Marcus Smith. That's the most minutes I think I've seen from any player thus far this year. I think he started and played pretty much every game at 10 and played 80 minutes most games. We've got a token Ford and Farrell in there at the top, but only when Smith had to be subbed for whatever reason. So, man, George Ford's minutes have dropped since last year, but again, a bit of game time out injured. And other number 9s that have kind of gotten in and fallen out, like Alex Mitchell, he's been a bit unlucky. Rafi Quirk as well. So, yeah, there's a lot of questions to be answered with 9 and 10 going forward. Is Borthwick going to have the same faith in Marcus Smith that Eddie showed in 2022? And who's going to partner him at 9? Interesting. Midfield, goodness me. It's a little bit messy again. 13 is particularly messy. I think it's a question. Obviously, I think, well, we'll start with 12 because 12 is a bit simpler. Owen Farrell gets more than half the game time. Henry Slade pretty much gets the rest. Those 2 guys. I think Slade played a bit more 13 last year, but he's been playing a bit more 12 in 2022. And then 13 is another one of those ones where there's not a front runner. I would have said if Tuilangi's fit, under Eddie, it's probably Tuilangi, but Tuilangi's only there in blue for this depth chart because Marchant got more game time than him at green, but obviously more towards the start of the year. Porter's had some game time there in yellow. Daly there in purple. Slade as well. So, yeah. It's Will Joseph, I think, had a very kind of bit of a token appearance, but yeah, 13's another one where it looks like a question to be answered, doesn't it? Obviously, as I said, if Tuilangi's fit, he's a really great option, but he is such a guy that you have to handle carefully. You have to manage his minutes, and maybe he's not a guy that can play, 50, 60, 70, 80% of the minutes in your season. Maybe he is only a guy that you can kind of bring in for every other game. We'll kind of have to see. And then the outside backs, man, look at that left wing. Look at that left wing. Johnny May, with just under a quarter of the game time, is still the leading candidate. Obviously got a few games at the end of the season. Jack Knoll, there in blue. Thokana Singer in yellow. Freeman in purple. Daly in red. Marchant. Arundel looks the business, but boy, did he got nominated for World Junior or Breakthrough Player of the Year. But bugger all minutes. Look at him there, that little black number at the top. Very, very token appearances. I mean, certainly made his mark on the game with what limited time he had, but the time was very limited. So there's people who question Johnny May going forward. Has he lost a yard of pace? Do they need to go with a big body like Thokana Singer? Do you go with a kind of a utility guy like a Marchant or a Daly who can kind of cover multiple positions? At a World Cup, that's something coaches tend to like to do. But yeah, the left wing has certainly been a bit of a revolving door. Right wing less so, with Knoll in green and Malins in blue. Those guys get the majority of the game time between the 2 of them. If you combine Jack Knoll's green from the right wing and then blue from the left wing, he certainly had kind of 65% of the game time this year. So he's certainly been one of Eddie's preferred options this year. And then Freddie Stewart there in yellow, Thokana Singer, Freeman as well. So the same guys kind of swapping positions. Freddie Stewart's an interesting one when they do play him on the right wing. Obviously he prefers fullback, but he's been shifted occasionally to the right wing because he is a great cross kick option, isn't it? If you want to get a guy in the air to catch a cross kick out of the wing, he's certainly one of the premier guys for that. And then fullback is just Freddie Stewart, 90% of the game time. It's been really hard to unseat. Furbank, I think, got a game there in blue, but for the most part, it's been Freddie Stewart. So I think he's played pretty much all the game time that Eddie can give him. So other guys who've kind of fallen off the pace, like midfield, Ollie Lawrence seems to have a pretty cracking shift to Bath when he moved earlier on in the season. Jacob Umaga, Mark Atkinson. Mark Atkinson was kind of a weird one to give a debut last year, given the stage in his career, but he is a guy that's kind of in the bank, I guess, with test experience if he was needed to be called upon. Radwan's certainly fallen out of favour despite getting called up a few times and then getting released from camp. Watson obviously been injured a fair bit, but it's like when you look at the overall look at the England squad, it's such a contrast, I think more so than we've seen from any other team thus far. Like left wing, like 13, and maybe like the locks and loose forwards, there's a real high number of names. And then there's other positions where just nobody else gets a go, like 10 and 15. Absolutely locked in, and to a lesser extent, Gench as well at loose head. Like for a prop, he's getting a lot of minutes. Hooker's only just the two of them. So, it's kind of a hard one to know what to make of that too much. If we're looking at this squad compared to the other squads around the traps, like the average starting, the starter for England is getting like 53% of the overall minutes, but obviously this is skewed a wee bit by a couple of guys like Stewart and Marcus Smith getting as much as they do, but that's the lowest of any of the teams thus far. The other teams tend to give their starting guys more game time than Eddie has done with England. Like New Zealand was at 57, South Africa was at 60, France was at 60, Ireland was at like 67%, it's like almost 70% of the game time goes to their starting 15. Furlong and Sexton, Sexton not so much because he spends a fair bit of time being managed as well. But Gibson Park and Keenan, like these guys, Van der Fleer, they just are lock in on their position. So England's kind of low on that regard. And then even the backup guy at 25% of the game time, like the second place guy, doesn't get as much game time as say the other countries. It just shows you there's a bit more rotation going on in England. They certainly get more game time than the Irish guys. Because the Irish guys pour more minutes into their starters, the backup guys get less game time. But that's them and South Africa are the only countries that England's ahead of. Like New Zealand gives more minutes to their second guy than Eddie did, which potentially means Eddie's giving more minutes to his third guy, but also to his fourth and fifth and sixth guy as well, which some of the other countries don't go that deep in terms of giving out caps to different guys. So if one thing, it is a young side, I would say that as well. I think it's the third youngest side of all the tier ones this year. Like only France and Italy played a younger team, like averaging like almost 27, just under 27 years old. Like some of the older squads like Ireland and South Africa, those guys are 29, 28. Most of the squads are in the 27. So he certainly can't be denied that Eddie's been bringing in some new faces. But still didn't get him to keep his job. In terms of the most selected 15, if we're just seeing which guys got the most minutes across the 2022 season, it's Gens, George, and Sinclair. That's your front row. I think most of us would probably pick that as the starting in the front row. Maybe you'd swap George for Cowan-Dickie if he's available. Itoje and Hill is the locking duo. I think that would surprise nobody. Laws, Vunipola, and Curry. Like I mentioned, Eddie likes that bit of tall timber at number 6. And I think in terms of like world back rows, I think that's a very competitive one. Youngs and Smith is the 9-10, but remember Youngs only just edges out the likes of a Van Portfleet, who was certainly the preferred guy at the end of the year. Midfield, Farrell and Marchant. I'm not sure whether that's a lock, especially 13. I still think 13 is a big question mark. And then May, Noel on the wings, and then Stewart. Again, I still think there's a big question mark. Stewart at fullback, I don't think is likely to go anywhere anytime soon, but the wings, I still think like 9, like 13, is very much a position up for grabs, but we'll wait and see. You guys let us know your thoughts. How do you reckon England looked in 2022? Do you think Eddie, with that, was like on the verge of something great, or do you think it was just a big old mess and jumble compared to what we've seen from some of the other squads who are a bit more stable? How do you think Borthwick's going to go? Who do you think he's going to kind of cut loose? Who do you think he's going to bring in? You guys let us know your thoughts, and I'll talk to you guys again soon.